Yields back. Chair recognizes now the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Lee.
Mr. Tolman, I'd like to go back to a concept that you raised earlier that I think is one of the really broad ideas we need to focus on here today, and that is that the advent of over-criminalization empowers rogue or politically motivated prosecutors to identify a person or target to prosecute rather than bringing criminal prosecutions based upon community needs, community safety, or the principles necessarily of fairness and equity. And you raised a particular example that I believe is instructive, and that is DA Alvin Bragg. I'd like to return to him for just a moment. Mr. Tolman, it is correct, is it not, that the case that Mr. Bragg brought against President Trump is actually predicated upon a set of misdemeanors for which the statute of limitation has run?
Yes, that is correct.
And would you agree, Mr. Tolman, that in fact that case is a good example of over-criminalization leading to selective or what appears to be entirely politically motivated prosecution?
When they have so many tools at their disposal and the ability to manipulate them, that is what over-criminalization ultimately leads to, is the use of the criminal code for something other than administration of fairness and justice.
Mr. Patil, I'd like to return to testimony that you gave in your opening statement that referred to criminal conduct that was not inherently blameworthy, rather the criminalization of conduct that wouldn't inherently be identified as wrong or blameworthy. And I'd like to discuss the concept of mens rea. How do you think we could use or integrate the concept of mens rea to ensure that that type of conduct to which you refer is not criminalized?
Well, I thank you for the question. The concept of mens rea is critical. I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes who said, even a dog knows the difference between being tripped over and being kicked. That guilty mind element is a necessary component to take away life or liberty from someone. So I think one of the things that can be done is really taking a look where this shows up more often than not is in the regulatory realm, where either Congress has given vague or an ambiguous term to an agency and the ability to criminalize behavior, or an agency is stretching beyond a little bit, maybe a little beyond what Congress had intended it to be able to do. But I think that there was a bill a number of years ago that would have simply, if there was no mens rea in a federal statute or a federal regulation, it would insert a default mens rea requirement into the regulation or the statute. And I think that that would be a huge step forward by Congress.
And Mr. McLaughlin, or Dr. McLaughlin, I'd like to go back to testimony you gave earlier as well. You used as an analogy the base realignment and closure commissions as a concept on how we might come at identifying all of these regulations and all of these things that we need to take account of and address as Congress. Would you go into some more detail there about your thoughts on how we might identify all of these regulatory agencies who have acted with such overreach and diminish the amount of these purported crimes that are out there?
Sure. The Bragg commissions was an example of, they put together a blue ribbon panel of experts to look at what can we get rid of, where we need to keep, what's essential. That's just one approach. I think another approach that we've seen be very effective in finding someone to go back and identify regulations that could be cut because they aren't accomplishing their purpose but they're creating harm is regulatory budgeting. And this is where you put the agencies themselves on the task of finding old regulations that they've written and that they can get rid of. And you say, if you want to make a new regulation, great, go do your job. But if you're going to do that, get rid of something that's on the books and has been there for 30 years that you think isn't effective anymore.
And then you mentioned also that you particularly utilized data and research and analysis in your work in identifying where these problems might exist. Are there ways in which you think Congress could use the same types of tools to assist us in our work?
Sure. One easy example here is the dates when statutes and regulations were made and looking if they've been updated, especially regulations. I can run a computer program through this Code of Federal Regulations and find when each regulation was last updated. If something hasn't been updated in 20, 30, 40 years, maybe it's time to get rid of it, or at least look at whether it's time to get rid of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The lady yields back. Chair now recognizes the distinguished ranking member from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for her 5